Hi everyone, I'm Jazz Civitan. I am the VITA Program Director at Avita of Needham. I have been with the company for 9.5 years now, proud to say, and thank you for this opportunity to share with you my passion of training, and specifically on this topic where we're going to be discussing supporting families and you through the dementia journey. Yes, I said in you too. We every day we work with our residents, and we as caregivers need support, but also our families. And oftentimes we could be that support for our family members. So thank you for joining today, and I hope to answer any questions and cover everything that you're thinking of when it comes to supporting families and yourself. Thank you. An overview of today's class. We'll go over a care study, and then we'll review the 5 stages of grief. This may be familiar to you. You may have even read the book. This is based on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's internationally known bestseller on death and dying. She is a Swiss-American psychiatrist, and I do think that the stages of grief that we'll review will be very familiar to you. We're also going to talk about how to help our families through the grieving process, which is so important within our communities. Next, I'm going to review an associate example because we as associates and as caregivers very much go through grieving as well when it comes to our residents, whether a passing of a resident or if a resident as they progress through their disease process, we too as caregivers can also go through the grieving process as well. Next, my favorite, we're going to talk about taking care of yourself, which is, as you can imagine, very important. Our real-life case study, and I think a lot of you will be able to relate to this and probably know a resident within your community, so here it goes. Barbara was the oldest child of 4 and the only girl. Even at a young age, she viewed as a mother figure to her younger brothers. Her childhood was spent in Fall River, Massachusetts, going on scenic rides. She enjoyed visiting with her grandparents and spending summers on the beach. She was a quiet girl who loved reading, animals, and her family. When she grew up, she was so proud that she graduated college and became an elementary school teacher. Even though she was quiet, she married a loud, funny Irishman. And they liked to tell stories that made her laugh, and they too had 5 children together. Her Catholic faith is very important, and she spent many hours praying the rosary for her children and her grandchildren. When her children grew up and had children of their own, she often took care of her grandchildren while their parents were at work. As you can see, faith, family, and children and love are all important to her. She prides herself on being a reliable, loving family member. In 2019, Barbara became very ill and spent time at the hospital. And at that exact same time, her husband of 60 years passed away. When she came home, her life changed drastically. Her family noticed she was no longer able to care for herself without the help of her husband. And now that he has passed away, they knew she needed more help. And they also began realizing that she had early stages of memory loss. Not only was this difficult transition for Barbara and on her family to an assisted living, but it was also emotionally difficult to make these hard decisions. They knew that she loved being home, and more than anything, she wouldn't make it easy to move. Now, I want you to take a moment here and discuss as a group and as a community, what are some of the emotions that Barbara is feeling? What are some of the emotions that her children are feeling? It may be helpful too to think of a resident within your community that best resembles Barbara, because Barbara's case study, Barbara's story really resembles a lot of our residents that we work with on a daily basis. So take this opportunity to review the emotions that both Mom, Barbara, and children have, and also maybe you can identify as a team of residents that best resemble Barbara, as we've just learned about her life story. I think we can think of a resident that may resemble her as well. Stages of grief. We tend to associate grief with death. However, people grieve all kinds of losses. By the time a resident comes to our Avita community, Their family member has already experienced loss of the person that they once knew. They are going through the grieving process, even when the resident is still with us. In caring for a resident, we must remember we need to care for the families too. They need us as much as our residents do. The woman pictured in this slide is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and as discussed, she's a Swiss-American psychiatrist and author on the best-selling book on death and dying. We will now go over the 5 stages of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross has outlined for us. Denial. I know that all of us have heard the word denial, and we may have personally experienced it in our own lives. So I think that we can relate personally, but also think professionally within your community, maybe with even some of our families. They may think that, hoping that the person isn't ill. That's something that's very common with denial. Also expecting the person to get better. This is something that I always like to identify as being a caregiver that's really difficult. We are all caring for residents within our communities, but we're working against a disease that isn't getting better. In fact, it's getting worse. And so sometimes denial can happen within the caregiver like us, where we want the resident to get better and we're working against this terminal disease. Now let's switch gears to talk about families. Families too feel that as well, that their loved one is going to get better, that maybe they choose a community such as ours to get better and to be part of all of the different programs that you have to offer and gain the support that's needed, because hopefully they'll get better. And as we know, in this disease process, it doesn't. It's progressive. And so denial is something very, very real that all of us go through. Sometimes you may convince yourself that the person hasn't changed. You may overlook different changes that you're seeing and just kind of think of it like, oh, it's no problem. Maybe they're having an off day. Sometimes we attempt to normalize problematic behaviors. People feel as though what is happening to them is unreal. We may think in our world that, oh my goodness, this isn't real. This person is going to get better. All of these are different examples of denial. I would like you as a care team to take this opportunity to describe when you've witnessed someone in denial, and if you're comfortable sharing, maybe personally when you were in denial. So take this time and pause and discuss as a care team. Anger. Say it with me, everyone. Anger. This disease stinks. And our residents feel angry sometimes, our families, we feel angry. And this is very valid. This is an emotion that we should all feel with this disease process. But let's kind of go back a little bit. Let's talk about our residents and the 5 stages of grief, anger being one. Our residents could feel anger towards themselves. They could feel anger towards their God. They could feel anger towards their physicians, toward associates like us. The list is endless. They could even be angry with their own family member. Also, they could feel abandoned. Our residents are here because they need a community such as ours to best support them in their disease process. With that being said, the sense of abandonment is very real. So we've talked a little bit about residents and what our residents could be feeling, but let's switch gears to our families. Families too could be angry with themselves. Families absolutely are angry with this disease process. Families could think, why me? Why my loved one? Why us? There's an element of anger as well, of maybe feeling that this disease is just taking and taking and taking. This disease is very much known as the longest goodbye. Their loved one that they're seeing isn't how they remember their loved one being. Their loved one could be very different in this disease process. So there's so many components of anger that any of us could be feeling. Us as caregivers too, we're angry at this disease. We see how it affects our residents. We see how it affects our families. Family members may get angry with their loved one as well. So then there's friction between loved one and resident. Because they're handling and dealing with this disease process, they could sometimes take out their anger on the person that has the disease, that has a form of dementia. Family members and caregivers resent the demands of caregiving. That's why they try to find a community like ours so they can share in that caregiving experience. We know as caregivers that this is a very demanding job, very demanding career. We love what we do, so let's just think of our families. They didn't choose to be a caregiver, and in fact, they're seeing the one person that they love the most going through this disease process. Can you see how anger plays such a significant role? Now think of our care study. Why could Barbara be angry? Why could her family be angry? Why could the caregivers maybe be angry that Barbara works with at her assisted living? This subject is so important to kind of dive deep in and better understand anger and where it could come from. Take this opportunity to pause and talk to each other as your care team and within your community. Have you witnessed this? Have you witnessed a resident being angry? Their family member? Did their family member take out their anger maybe on you? So take this time and talk to each other as a team. Bargaining. In this stage, someone grieving will want to negotiate their way out of the loss. They may think this can't possibly be happening to me. This isn't right. Let me find a better doctor. Maybe there's a medicine. Maybe there's even a better community that could take care of my loved one. All of these different ways of thought our families go through. Imagine being told that your loved one has a terminal illness. I want that to resonate with all of us. Our families go through this. So they're looking for answers. So take this opportunity. Have you experienced this in your community? Has a family member said to you, maybe we need to find another physician. Oh, I wonder if there's a medicine that will help me. Also think, have you had residents that have looked into different communities other than your community? This has happened probably everywhere, so discuss as a care team. Have you heard this before? So take a quick pause and we'll come back. Next, family members often have a huge sense of guilt. Their loved one may have said, and we probably have heard this maybe even in our own families, never put me in a home or a community or anything, a nursing home. I don't know about you, but I have heard this personally in my family. So our families also have heard this. Their loved one may have had specific wishes that they wanted for their life. And unfortunately, with this disease process, things have to change. So families could be feeling a huge sense of guilt. Family members can also feel bad because they're still able to enjoy their life. So let's just say one of our residents who are living in our community, our families are visiting, of course, and then they still feel guilt because I'm able to live my life, and maybe they think their loved one isn't. We know as caregivers that that's not true, that we do our very best to actively engage all of our residents, but our families, they may feel, I'm enjoying my life, my loved one clearly isn't. A lot of time our families could feel that they've failed. For example, they could think that, could I have cared for my loved one at home? So it's almost as if we've all heard the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. Could I have cared for my loved one at home? Should I have picked that community? Or should I have kept my loved one home with me? Could I have done things differently? Again, all of these questions are constantly going on in the mind of our families. I know that because a lot of us can personally think kind of what has happened with our own families. Maybe you're a caregiver at your own home. Also, in this bargaining stage, sometimes our families could have negative thoughts. Why my loved one? If this would just go away. These are thoughts that would never happen, but because of this disease process, a lot of our families could have these thoughts. Also, regretting things about your relationship with your loved one. Families sometimes may have a time in their life that they've regretted, maybe time or lack of time they spent with their loved one. And almost the idea of it's too late, we can't go back in time. So it's regretting the time maybe spent with the loved one, lack of time spent. So all of these different things kind of colliding together. I'd like you to take the opportunity, again, as your community and care team, have you seen this with your families? Have you yourself experienced this? So take this opportunity and pause and discuss as a care team. Depression. Depression is a stage of grief, feeling overwhelmed by loss. This is something that you may feel and you cry frequently, that you kind of express all of those emotions that you're feeling inside. You may find yourself withdraw from social activities and needing to connect more frequently with others. So think of depression in the sense of your resident. Think of depression also with your families. This too is something very real that a lot of our residents and a lot of our families go through. And I'd like you to put yourself in their position and imagine if you felt this overwhelming feeling of loss. If you were withdrawing from the things that you love to do every single day. Imagine if you were crying frequently just to get that kind of built up emotion out. You may be withholding your emotions or displaying them more openly than usual. So think about that. You either are holding your emotions in or they're just coming out and you maybe wish that they weren't coming out when they're coming out, but you don't have the ability to control that in that moment. At this moment, at this point in our grieving journey of the 5 stages, denial no longer can be sustained. Individuals are facing the enormity of what is lost. At this moment, in this stage, I am feeling that loss. I'm feeling the loss of my loved one. Or if you're the resident, you're personally feeling that loss. You could also be feeling the loss of your family members. See how complicated it can get? There's a lot of emotions with this stage. There's a lot of emotions with all of the stages. So depression itself is really just demonstrating that overwhelming feeling of loss. Some examples that you may see within your community is a resident choosing to stay in their apartment. All of a sudden, that same resident that would come to all of your programs, you're starting not to see as much. They're starting to retreat. They're starting to stay in their apartment where they feel maybe safe, where they can control their environment. They don't want to be embarrassed when they leave their apartment because maybe they can't keep up with that conversation. There are so many different examples of depression and what you see within your community. So take this time to pause. I want you to group together as a care team. Have you seen depression within your residents? Have you seen depression within your own family members? Maybe they're the resident that lives within your community. You see their families on a daily basis and you know that they're going through this stage of grief. So take this moment and talk together as a care team. Finally, acceptance. Learning to live in the moment. Gosh, let's say that one together. Learning to live in the moment. Finding personal meaning in caring for someone who is terminal. So at this stage of grief, finally, it's acceptance. It doesn't mean that this disease is getting any better, but at least you, as a person, you're finally at that stage of accepting. Understanding how the grieving process affects your life. You've just gone through the ringer. And when I say you've gone through the ringer, maybe you have gone through the grieving process, but our families are definitely going through the grieving process. And we only hope that they get to acceptance. Appreciating the personal growth that comes from surviving loss. So that's really important, appreciating your own personal growth. I think a lot of us can personally connect with this in thinking of an experience or something that we have grown in and appreciating it. All of the hard work it took to get you to wherever it is that you were trying to get to. Finding your sense of humor again. So in this stage, it's pretty easy to think, this sounds like the stage I finally become myself again. I finally recognize who I am. I have my sense of humor back. I have who I am again. It's back. What is still here as well is the disease process, your loved one going through this disease. But you're still able to have that acceptance. Finally, in this stage 2, you're actually asking others for help and accepting help from others. A lot of times, if someone asks, do you need help? What does everybody always say? I bet you said it. No, I'm okay. Nope, I got this. This is a stage where it opens up and it allows you to feel, you know what? If someone asks me if I need help, yes, I need help. And in this stage, you accept that help. It's not as uncomfortable as it once was. Family members may find it easier to use validation in order to interact with their loved ones. So again, in this stage of grief is finally acceptance. Acceptance feels really good. Think of a situation where maybe in your personal lives you felt accepted. You have reached this stage. Now think of our families. Imagine getting to this stage, that this is freeing for that person. Again, I will reiterate, our loved one is still going through that disease process, but you've gone through the grieving process as well. And this is the final step, is that acceptance. So you're living in the moment, you're finding your sense of humor and who you are as a person again. Take this opportunity to chat in your teams right now. Have you personally gained acceptance? Have you seen your families go through the grieving process and finally achieve acceptance? Now, can you identify families that are still going through the grieving process? Take this time and discuss. How can you help families as they're going through the grieving process? We do it every day. You may be doing it not realizing that you're helping your families through this grieving process. So how do we do it? You may wonder. Have you ever listened to a family member complain to you? Have they ever shared their concerns with you? This is a really important kind of thought process. It's really easy for us as caregivers to almost take it personally, and we can't. This is how we can best support our families. So if a family member is coming to you complaining about something, this is also a sense of, they're feeling maybe a sense of loss of control. They may be feeling anxiety. So a family member coming to you may present itself as a complaint or concern or that they have an issue, but please know that it's nothing to take personally. In fact, think of it as they trust you to come to you to share what's in them, what's really been bothering them. They chose to come to you. I advise to be patient with that family member. Again, families are going to ask questions. Why are they going to ask questions? Well, because their loved one is living within your community and they're not with their loved one all the time anymore. They also may feel, I know how to take care of my loved one, but how can you know how to take care of my loved one? So again, if a family member, or I should say, when a family member comes to you stressing different complaints and concerns, please know that they are identifying you as a strong caregiver and someone that they trust with their loved one. Something that comes up and sometimes in our communities is sometimes families don't visit as often, or maybe you notice a resident and maybe they don't receive any visits. So we can't judge. We don't know what's going on within a family dynamic. Maybe they just visited when you weren't working. But please keep in mind that we shouldn't judge families depending on how often they come in to see their loved one. We aren't in their position. And again, as we learned in this training, they're going through a grieving process, and they may be in the process where they need space. They need to really think about what's going on, and they may need that time to themselves. So never judge about the frequency of someone visiting your residents and within your community. I love when our associates do this. When families come in, I love that our associates know who they are. They know our families by name. Think of yourself, be a family member, and someone calling you by name, that means a lot. So our associates connecting with our families, talking to our families, ask questions to our families. It allows our family members to feel that you love their loved one, because you do. We wouldn't be in this work if we didn't love our residents, if we didn't love our families. So ask questions, talk to our families, and partner with our families. Spend more time getting to know families when they come in to visit. Obviously, we want to protect the time that our families have with their loved one, but just check in. How are you doing today? Oh, your mom went to this program, or she had a great morning. Whatever it is, but connect with our families. It allows our families to see who you are as a caregiver as well. Because I trust in this team here that you guys do a great job. Again, I've said it a few times in this training. You wouldn't be in the job that you're in unless you loved what you do. So partner with those families. It will go a long way as they're traveling through the grieving process. How about you? Your emotional well-being is so incredibly important. And it's important to our residents that you are at your very best. Our residents are experiencing a disease process that is progressive and that isn't getting better. And without us, without you, without our caregivers within our different communities, our residents wouldn't be as successful. They wouldn't be as loved if it wasn't for you. But with that being said, because of this disease process, this is very difficult on the caregiver, on us. Now, we talked about families and we've talked about the resident themselves, but I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about our associates, talk about you, the very person that is watching this video right now and taking this training. It's very important to think about your feelings and your emotional well-being, and understand that there are resources too, like the Alzheimer's Association hotline. It's a 24-hour hotline that you can call if you need extra support or if you have questions about this disease process. Please know you can always go to a member of your team for support. This is a disease process that is unforgiving, and we see our residents every day, and we love our residents wholeheartedly. And as they progress, this definitely weighs heavy on all of our minds and our hearts. So please know that you aren't alone as a caregiver, but that you have the support within your community, within your company. How about you? This is an associate connection example. So the woman that you're looking at, her name is Harriet, and that is her. She was one of our residents at Avita of Needham, and I think that her story not only is important, but it will show the love that we have for her and for all of our residents. Now, Harriet is a resident that you could have in your community now, or you may think of a resident and think, oh wow, this is so similar to Harriet's story. So here is a little bit about Harriet and how this connects with us as the associate. Harriet is a resident that moved into your community at 101 years old. Harriet is fiercely independent, working first as a nursery school teacher at the Queens School and Boardman School in New York City. She pursued her education. Harriet received her master's in counseling, and through all of that, she developed her own private practice. She is a loving daughter that visits frequently and identifies the community as an extension of her family. She comes in and she thanks the care team. She takes her time getting to know the team that loves and helps her mom. There isn't a day that goes by that Harriet's daughter doesn't sit down with one of us as mom's caregivers and just laughs and just enjoys time spent together. Usually her daughter's visit ends with an embrace with you. Now, this is a resident, Harriet, and a daughter, Linda, that we as a team were so close with. And like the story outlines, there wasn't a day that didn't go by that you didn't offer a hug to Harriet or a hug to her daughter. As life goes, you start seeing Harriet needing more care, support. And now Harriet's family in your community is partnering with hospice to offer that additional level of support and care that Harriet so needs. Harriet's daughter is now coming in every day to spend all day and all night with mom. You and your fellow associates are in and out of Harriet's apartment to spend time with her, sit by her side, and offer kind words in her ear. Ultimately, Harriet does pass away, and it brings great sadness, of course, to her daughter, to you, your fellow associates. Just to think about this woman being part of us and in all of our hearts. Harriet's daughter shares with you she's going to miss you and all of the care team. So I want you to think of this example as it's a very real example, real to us, real to a community of ours, but also real to all of you, as I can safely assume that you all have a resident that you're thinking of in your mind that is very similar to this story. So how can you relate to this story? Is there someone within your community you instantly thought of when hearing about Harriet? And as a care team right now, I want you to talk about what helps you get through times like this. Because I can share with you, this was especially hard for our staff, for our other residents, for families. And I know you can relate to this. So I'd like you to pause at this moment and talk to each other. Did you think of someone? What do you do when you're going through something like this? What helps you? Ways to cope with grief and loss. I want you to take this opportunity as a team to brainstorm ways that you deal with grief and loss. Everyone is different, as we all know, and as you've heard over and over again, we're all different. Well, and that also means we deal and handle with grief and loss differently from each other, but it doesn't mean to say that we can't support one another. Sometimes you may need to talk about what you're experiencing. Sometimes you may kind of retreat inside and want to just go through it independently. But take this opportunity to talk as a team. What do you do when going through a loss of one of your residents? What do you do and how do you cope when you start seeing changes, significant changes with your residents? Like I said, everyone is different and we go through grief and loss differently, but I have a funny feeling that once you start talking about it, everyone can relate, and ultimately you become each other's support system. Ways to cope with grief and loss. Claim the grieving process as your own. The grieving process for all of us is very different, and we grieve at different times. So please know that if one moment you're feeling fine and the next you're not, that's normal. All of us are very different. And I would safely assume that when you brainstormed as a team of ways that you cope with grief and loss, you realize that a lot of you grieve differently. Now, your experience will also depend on the duration of time that you were with that person. There's some of our residents that we've worked with for years, and there's some residents that maybe we just met. Some residents that we have that special bond that we just can't put our finger on. So it will hit you in different levels, in different ways of grief with the different people. And it doesn't mean that you are anything but a great and amazing caregiver. So please know this grieving process is your own, but you're not alone when going through this. Taking care of yourself. So take this opportunity. What do you like to do? And I know a lot of people will say, I love to work, which is great. I love that you love to work. You wouldn't be doing what you're doing unless you loved it. But this is an opportunity to think of the things that you do for yourself to be happy. So you may spend time with your family, you may travel, maybe you exercise, whatever it is that makes you happy. I want you to think about it and make sure that you're taking the time in your day for yourself. So again, as a team, you know what I'm going to ask you. What do you like to do? What do you yourself like to do that makes you happy and that makes you fulfilled in life? In conclusion, keep in mind, families, residents, and us, we all grieve differently. And always know that you aren't alone. Our residents are so important to us, and as caregivers, we can't help but love our residents. And with that, and the fact that they are going through a disease process that is unforgiving, it automatically will create grief for the people that really love and care for our residents, which is us and our families. So please keep that in mind, that the grieving process is very personal and it's very different for everybody. Also keep in mind you have to take care of yourself. Please think today, tomorrow, and the next day, think every single day, what's going to make me happy today? What can I do for myself?